Welcome to a special episode of the Breakpoint Podcast. I am John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center. Typically, we'd be preparing another question and answer episode with Shane Morris for you. But if you have not been hiding away or completely unplugged, just an incredibly important cultural event yesterday when a early draft of an opinion written by Justice Alito in what could be the most consequential case of certainly this Supreme Court term, probably in recent memory, having to do with Dobbs versus women's whole health, an overturning of Roe v. Wade. It was leaked, and Politico reported on that. And there's so many layers to this. It is very difficult to know where to begin. We've got the unprecedented act of leaking not only the way the court is leaning, but an actual draft of the opinion. You've got the timing between now and when the official opinion is released. You have the actual text, and clearly what Justice Alito is trying to do in this draft. You've got what this will mean for abortion rights, for the pro-life movement going forward, what it will mean for states, what it will mean for the division in the United States between so-called abortion states and so-called life states. So there's so many layers to this. I called in some help. So we're going to have a conversation here, first of all, with Erin Hawley, who's the senior advisor for the appellate team at the Alliance Defending Freedom. She has been paying attention to this Dobbs case from the very beginning and has been really one of the experts kind of helping us understand what's being argued, why it's being argued, and what the potential consequences are. So she's going to join us. And then we're going to be joined by Dr. Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, who has got a new book coming out in just a few weeks called Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Essentially Ruins Everything. And as we hit this kind of cultural landmark, this historic moment in the abortion debate in America, his book kind of talking about kind of the wake that it has had in American culture is really important. So we're going to talk about the leak. We're going to talk about what that means for the court. We're going to talk about the opinion. We're going to talk about what's in the opinion, what this means and what it doesn't mean here on the Breakpoint Podcast. There's so many layers to the story, it's hard to know where to begin. And so I am seeking help, first of all, from Erin Hawley. Erin is senior counsel to the appellate team at the Alliance Defending Freedom. When I hear stories like this, in fact, as I was racing between gates, I was texting Kristen Wagoner, senior vice president at ADF, who will also be joining us at the Wilberforce weekend next week in Orlando, Florida, longtime friend, and saying, is this possibly legitimate? And she's like, I don't know. And here's what's happening. And everyone was kind of in it. And so Kristen pointed to Erin Hawley, who is our guest here on the Breakpoint Podcast, to bring some sense to this. Erin also will be joining us at the Wilberforce weekend at our very special Thursday night event, Life After Roe. When we coined that event, Life After Roe, and we've got Stephanie Gray Connors, Kristen Hawkins from Students for Life, Jim Daly, Tim Tebow. When we put this event together, we did not schedule this particular leak to happen a week before. But here we are, Erin Hawley. First of all, let me just say thanks. We're real excited to have you. Your role in next week's event is to bring clarity to what the Dobbs decision could potentially be. Now we've got some sort of version, we think, of what it could potentially be. So we're going to give everyone a sneak peek here. So Erin Hawley, first of all, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
So Erin, first of all, this leak happens. This seems shocking to most of us. You have a closer inside version. How shocking is this that a decision like this would be, or a version of the decision would be leaked like this?
Absolutely shocking, and probably even more shocking to those of us who have clerked at the court than to the general public. The court is sort of this sealed institution that for years has had a really high standard of not leaking. It would just be sort of untoward and incomprehensible that anyone would even speak to a reporter, much less leak an opinion. Every clerk takes an oath of confidentiality. And so I think those who are familiar with the Supreme Court and its practices are even more shocked that this opinion leaked. There's nothing that's happened like this before. And certainly we hope that nothing happens like this again.
So is there any possibility in your mind, I mean, having been a clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court, and who did you clerk with? I'm sorry, I should have known that information.
No, the Chief Justice Roberts.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, that gives you an inside look here of how things are actually handled. Is there any possibility that this document's a fake? I mean, it's 90 pages with 30 pages of footnotes.
Yes.
That's a heck of a forgery if somebody pulled that off.
Yes. And if you look at the opinion, I've had the chance to read it, the draft opinion, and it very much does read like an opinion that would have been written by Justice Alito. He's got some of his, catchy turns of phrase. It's very thorough. It completely debunks the idea that Roe or Casey are part of our tradition, our nation's tradition or history. And so I think it's a very well-written opinion. And I think its thoroughness and its sort of eloquence do suggest that it is probably a first draft from Justice Alito.
So I don't want to have you speculate too much because, there's been such a trend over the last 10 years for conservatives and progressives alike to see an initial story react and then be wrong. I mean, we're kind of allergic to that at the Colson Center. I mean, you can think about the Covington Catholic boys. The list goes on and on. Having been in the inside, who has access to these documents? So the dominant theory clearly on Twitter, which, is a dangerous place to get your dominant theory, is that it's a progressive justice. A lot of eyes are on particular justices. I don't want to go there because I think that is a step too far. But and you can speculate as much as you're comfortable speculating. But tell me, can you bring everyone's kind of going, how should I think about that? And you have a unique perspective, having been behind the scenes, even in the Chief Justice's chambers.
Sure, absolutely. So I think when you think about the court, there are three potential sources. The first is, as you mentioned, the justices. They obviously have the draft, as the draft mentions, that was circulated. It was sent presumably from Justice Alito's chambers to each of the other justices. Then, of course, you have the clerks. Each of the justices has 4 clerks. And then you have assistants and staff that help the justices run their chambers, sort of employees of the justices' chambers. So you've got these 3 different groups, each of whom might have had access to this opinion. Typically, one clerk is assigned to a case and will help the justice prepare for that case, prepare for oral argument, then discuss the case with them afterwards, see the draft opinion. Now, in this case, it's such a big case that I wouldn't be surprised if every clerk, wanted to see what the draft opinion said. And there's nothing wrong with that, that they're part of the Supreme Court. They're helping their justice in formulating the best opinion for the court. But somewhere here, something went badly off the rails. Again, every clerk that clerks of the court takes a oath of confidentiality. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So if it's a justice, that would be even more shocking. I think the relationship among the justices, despite, the heated 5-4 decisions that we see, in general, the justices have a very collegial relationship. You can think about the relationship between the late Justice Scalia and the late Justice Ginsburg. There's this great picture that used to be in her office of the 2 of them riding an elephant together. And even though they disagreed vehemently about issues, including abortion, they still had a respect for one another that, at least in their cases, I would never think that either of them would leak anything like this. And I think that hopefully can be said for the rest of the justices. So I don't know who leaked it, but it is very damaging to the court as an institution. It's unprecedented, and as big as the story is over Roe, this issue of a leak at the court is just as big.
You're right. I mean, it's a absolutely huge story, which is so difficult because we've been waiting for this decision. We have, those of us that have been in the pro-life movement for any period of time whatsoever, this is a historic decision, that we have been waiting on. It had a potential that no other decision before it had. And that's really why we asked you to join us next week down in Orlando for our special Life After Roe event there at the Rose and Shingle Creek. If you're in the Orlando area, Florida area, especially now, given we have a little bit of a window into what might be coming from the court, and I think it's important. You can help us here with procedure. So let's start here. This is not a decision being issued. This is a draft being leaked. What's the difference?
Absolutely. That's a great point. And if you look at the date on the draft that was leaked, it's February 10th. So that was a couple of months ago. And so what typically happens in a Supreme Court case is a justice who is in the majority is assigned the case. It seems like the Chief Justice might be somewhere in the middle. Again, that's speculation. I hope that he votes to overrule Roe in full. But if Justice Thomas was the most senior justice on the majority, then he would have assigned that opinion, presumably from the leak, to Justice Alito. Justice Alito would have then worked for months to prepare that first draft opinion. And then that would have circulated, as we saw, to each of the chambers. Then you've got sort of two different things that takes place at the court. One, those who are on the other side, the dissent, start working on their dissent. They were probably already working on it and responding to the majority. But those justices who joined Justice Alito in voting to overturn Roe also have a chance to look at the opinion and say, I really like that, or could you tweak this language a little bit, or I'm not sure about this paragraph. And so there's this internal opinion building process that takes place, especially in cases like this, where the draft will change over time, sometimes substantially, sometimes not much at all. And then you often see other justices writing concurrences. So maybe they want to be stronger on a particular point. So you could see Justice Thomas or Justice Gorsuch writing an opinion saying, look at this issue in addition. So there's lots of sort of dynamic, collaborative opinion writing that goes on in addition to the draft we saw.
What do you think? I'm just tempted to say, what is Justice Alito thinking this morning as he wakes up? I mean, I know that's too much conjecture, but there's got to be just a seismic shock among Supreme Court justices that this was an unthinkable sort of possibility, and now it happened.
Absolutely. So the entire court, I think, was completely shocked that an opinion was leaked, especially one of this magnitude. That has such an effect on democracy in our country. And if you look at Justice Alito's opinion, he just does a great job. Again, presumably Justice Alito's opinion, we think it's legitimate, but of course the court has not issued its official opinion. But he marches through the history of Roe and of Casey and explains how those courts' decision was not grounded in anything constitutional. There's no right to an abortion in the Constitution's text, structure, or history. Justice Alito dismantles sort of this historical idea that there's some right to abortion that can be found in the common law. He notes that Roe overturned nearly every law, or a pro-life law, I should say, in nearly every single state. So it's a really thorough debunking that the right to abortion is grounded anywhere in our Constitution. So I hope he's thinking that he's proud of his opinion, but I'm sure mostly he is shocked that it is, every law professor in the country is going to have the chance now to take sort of pot shots at it because it's out there before it's final, and so that's probably a little frustrating. But it's a very well done opinion.
Well, you have looked more closely at the Dobbs case than anyone else at ADF. You're kind of the pointed to expert. You have been a part of several public panels and events on this and watched it so closely. So let's talk about that, because Alito's opinion, and thank you, by the way, for reading it. God bless you. I don't know how late you were up last night. What a long opinion. You guys are nerdy junkies, and man, you did it. You pulled it off. Congratulations. But one of the historic parts of the Dobbs case was that the state of Mississippi decided to not only argue for the validity of its law, but to argue against the validity of Roe v. Wade. So you read then Alito's opinion. Could it, based on what, again, it's an early draft, Is it everything that you hoped it would be?
If you look at the opinion, I think it does a really good job of explaining why Roe is found nowhere. There's no right to an abortion in constitutional text, structure, or history. It marches through the scientific developments that science has changed a lot since 1973. It talks about, as Justice Barrett did, oral argument about safe haven laws. And so this idea that having a family can be a burden to women, while a lot of us think it's a blessing, also recognizing that adoption is a very viable option in all 50 states. So the opinion sort of has a couple of parts. It looks first, is there any historical right to abortion? Is it deeply rooted in our nation's tradition and history, as the court's precedents require? And that answer is clearly no. Then the opinion talks about stare decisis. And the idea basically is, even if Roe is wrong, even if Casey is wrong, should we still uphold them anyway? And says there's no reason to uphold Roe and Casey, even though they're wrong. They march through sort of the factors of reliance. And one thing Justice Alito's opinion focuses on is the damage that the so-called right to abortion and the court's finding of it in Roe and Casey have done to this country. And in essence, because the Constitution doesn't say anything about abortion, it is an issue that's left to the people and to the states to the power to protect life. And as even Justice Ginsburg said, and I think she gets a shout out in the opinion, Justice Ginsburg called Roe a heavy-handed judicial intervention that provoked rather than sort of diminished public backlash. And so it's this idea that the court took to itself, aggrandized to itself, this issue that belonged with the people. So it's been damaging to our democracy. It's damaging to our institutions and to the court. And so there's no reason to stick to it.
Yeah. Well, the stare decisis point is incredibly important because everyone wants stare decisis if it's an opinion or a position that they historically agree with. But as I understand it, there was a that was a heavily footnoted section pointing out all the different places, or maybe not all the different places, but many of the different times through history that SCOTUS has overturned itself.
That's such a great point, John. And if you look, Justice Alito sort of tongue-in-cheek actually notes that Casey, in fact, overruled several prior abortion cases and overruled Roe in part. And then he talks in particular about a number of opinions of the court, including Brown versus Board, which overruled cases. So some of our very most important decisions coming from the Supreme Court have been those in which the court overruled a past erroneous decision. And there's this one great footnote. I hope it stays in there. I think it runs like a page and a half, and it lists all of the cases in which certain that have overruled other cases. So you're absolutely correct. Stare decisis is not, as the court says, an inexorable command, but rather it bows when a decision is egregiously wrong and as harmful as Roe and Casey.
So again, to be clear, this is an early draft of an opinion that looks legit because a forgery like that would be an accomplishment if somebody could pull that off. So it looks like that, but it's not the decision. The decision is not until the final decision is not until the final opinion is released. So to be clear, but if this happens to be the lane that this opinion lands in, let's be really clear on what it means and what it doesn't mean. So what does this mean for abortion? That's an important question given, I was flipping back and forth on the TV screen there in the airplane last night between MSNBC and Fox News and CNN. It's like watching different planets, you don't even know. But certainly heard people say, bring out the Handmaid's Tale reference, which I'm so tired of hearing. I could just, bang my head against the wall. You hear the ban abortion, you hear the criminalize abortion language. So let's be really clear. What does this mean and what does it not mean?
So the draft opinion is really clear, and it will just return to the states the ability to discuss these issues, to debate them, to Justice Ginsburg criticized the decision for short-circuiting democratic debate. And once the court handcuffs of Roe and Casey are off, It will be up to the people. It's really up to all of us to debate and discuss this issue in our state legislatures with our representatives, and for the issue to be one for the people. So it's going to return that issue, the issue of abortion, to the states. As Justice Alito said, people disagree on that. And it's one that the court should stay out of. And if Roe is overturned, the court will no longer be in the business of legislating abortion, but rather states, state by state, will be able to adopt restrictions, will be able to protect life. And you'll probably, quite frankly, see some states like California and New York that will continue to have very liberal abortion laws. And I think one of the things that's misunderstood about Roe, Roe and Casey talk about balancing the interests. But there's no balancing that goes on. It restricts states like Mississippi from protecting life at the very reasonable age, the very modest age of 15 weeks, when a baby can smile, she can hiccup, she can move and stretch and likely feel pain. And under Roe and Casey, Mississippi cannot protect her. And yet, under Roe and Casey, states like not Mississippi, states like California and New York can permit abortion up until the moment of birth. And so, if this opinion comes to be, if the Supreme Court reverses Roe, that will be off the playing field, and states like Mississippi will be able to protect life.
So this becomes a state issue. At the same time, Bernie Sanders last night quickly tweeted out that it's time to overturn the filibuster, to codify abortion rights through the legislature. Is that a legislative possibility? That seems also to create this cascading kind of set of effects, in terms of how to, including having to overturn a filibuster in order to get there.
Yeah, so I think that's a really tricky proposition for the Senate, especially as currently composed. It's equally split 50-50. So I don't see that going anywhere right now. And I think it does return to the states in the first instance, and states will be able to protect life. And it really is the case in which, all of us should be engaged and involved in these discussions and putting forward our views that every life merits protection and is valuable to God. And if Roe's gone, we can do that more effectively in those states.
There's so much here that you just said. We could just unpack that for a really long time, which is we're here not because the court made a decision, but because the people came to marches, and people showed up at pregnancy resource centers and volunteered, and arguments were formulated by academic elites that then trickled down through popular apologists to help everyday people have the conversations, as Chuck Colson used to say, over the backyard fence and around the barbecue grill. And that continues. That doesn't, we could never rely on the Supreme Court to do our job. The Supreme Court had to do its job. And we got a glimpse into it. We pray that this is where it's headed, and that means they will have done their job. But that doesn't mean that our job is over. And our job then continues. And if we can't expect the state legislators to do our job either. They're going to do their job. We have to do our job so that they can do their job. And that's why I'm so excited about the timing of this event next week down in Orlando, Florida. I'm so excited, Erin, to have you as a part of this panel. You brought so much clarity even here. I mean, I just can't believe you read that thing in the last 12 hours. And, your ability to just say, okay, Here's it's crazy in this room. Here's everything that's happening was just so helpful today. So thank you for doing that so quickly. Thank you for joining us next week. Again, that's next Thursday, May the 12th, at the Rosen Shingle Creek Resort in Orlando, Florida. Erin Hawley here from ADF will be with us, as well as Kristen Hawkins from Students for Life. She'll be talking about what that strategy is, what our job is. That's what she does as well as anyone. Stephanie Gray Connors, who's one of those apologists that I mentioned, she will be talking about these kind of slogans that get thrown around. The Handmaid's Tale slogan. This is an attack on women's health care. This is an attack on women's rights. She'll help us address each and every one of those slogans. Jim Daly, who talks about celebrating life, and he celebrates life at Focus on the Family as well as anybody. And then, of course, the one and only Tim Tebow, who will be Tebowing. We'll just put it that way. That's what he'll be doing. So it'll be a great event. And what an amazing what an amazing timing this is. And we hope you guys can join us. And Erin, so grateful for you to join us. Senior counsel for the appellate team at the Alliance Defending Freedom, nose on the ground here on this opinion on the Dobbs case, on the ruling, on where the legal standing is when it comes to abortion in America. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, I hope you'll join us if you are in the Florida area next week, Thursday evening, May the 12th. You can go to wilberforceweekend.org, wilberforceweekend.org for tickets. By the way, you don't have to come to the whole event to come to the Thursday night event. And the Thursday night event is absolutely free. It's just too important for us to have this conversation. What will it look like to live in a post-Roe America? So come to wilberforceweekend.org. And if you're not able to join us in person, then we'll be working on some sort of digital release in the future. So stay tuned for that. Well, I'm pleased to welcome now my good friend, Dr. Ryan T. Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, author of many books, including the upcoming Tearing Us Apart, to take this conversation further. Well, welcoming on now our good friend Ryan Anderson, Dr. Ryan T. Anderson, famous for his Amazon bannings, author of the book When Harry Became Sally, but also president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Ed Whalen, who's a fellow at EPPC, has been writing some really important pieces as well. And we'll link to all those if you come to breakpoint.org. He's been writing some really important pieces on what this unprecedented leak of this early draft of an Alito opinion means. Ryan, we just talked to Erin Hawley from ADF, and we were joking about this looks real. This opinion does not look like a forgery. If it is a forgery, that's pretty impressive, actually, because it's 90-some pages, and it sounds an awful lot like Alito. What's your take on that?
Well, literally minutes ago, as while we were logging in, if you saw me like squinting, I was reading the court just put out a statement saying that it is an authentic draft. And the Chief Justice put out a statement just saying how damaging this is to the necessary confidential nature of the court's deliberations. I've had friends who have clerked in the Supreme Court more or less every year for the past decade. And, one of them was, best man at my wedding. They will not tell me a thing of what takes place behind closed doors. They take that that confidentiality, that vow of secrecy very seriously. And even an off the record, comment of, hey, don't ever repeat this, but just so you know, they don't do it. And so to have someone publicly leak, not just like a vote count, not just an internal deliberation, but the actual draft of an opinion, it's a serious, further erosion of our institutions, right? And so I think a lot about Yuval Levin's work on about how important our institutions are. And the Supreme Court was one of the institutions that still had a pretty good functionality, right? We might always, not always agree with the outcomes, but it actually functioned. And you think about the famous friendship between Ginsburg and Scalia, right? You had people who vehemently disagreed about the law, but were civil, and not only civil, charitable, friendly, and they would never have leaked to undermine each other, right? And so this is, who knows who issued the leak, whether it came from a clerk or one of the justices or from a staff member. Everyone's speculating about that, but the bottom line is that this is not good for the institution. It's not good for the necessary confidentiality for that institution to function well.
Yeah, we had Dr. Levin on several weeks ago on a short course on the loss of trust and specifically dealing with trusted institutions. And that's such an important angle, Ryan. What we've heard leading up to this decision, even from Justice Sotomayor, is that if an overturning of Roe would damage the institution of the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts seems particularly concerned about whether or not the credibility of the court can be salvaged and so on. This draft, and thank you for confirming, I had not heard that the court had actually released a statement. That's an important data point. So here we are. Justice Alito spends an awful lot of time dealing with the stare decisis point, and I talked to Erin about that as well. What do you make of Sotomayor's comment that to overturn Roe would be the thing that damaged the institution, as opposed to a leak like this.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, the leak is much more damaging than overturning a wrongly decided decision, because wrongly decided decisions, when they're egregiously wrong, when they're unworkable, when they commit injustice, they should be corrected at the first available opportunity. I mean, I think the real tragedy here is that it took 49 years. I think if anything undermined the court's integrity, it was the Casey decision, where you didn't even have a majority of the justices saying, we think Roe was correctly decided, right? If I remember the head counting correctly, it was 2 justices who thought it was correctly decided, 4 who thought it was incorrectly decided, and then the plurality opinion by 3 justices who said, look, we don't think it was rightly decided, but for other reasons, we think we have to uphold the central holding of Roe, and that's where we got the Casey regime. No, someone on Twitter had responded to something I tweeted out, and I had to screenshot 3 pages of the Alito draft opinion. It's a footnote where he just documents case after case after case, and some of these are historic cases where the court had to correct a prior error that it made. It got Roe wrong. It got Casey wrong. Now's the time to finally admit that it got those cases wrong, because it didn't just get cases wrong, right? In getting those cases wrong, it allowed an injustice to take place. It allowed unborn human beings to be denied equal protection of the law. And, when Dobbs is actually decided, publicly, officially decided, if what we see in Alito's draft opinion holds, what that would do is it would then allow us, working through the democratic process at the state level and the federal level, to enact laws that would protect unborn babies, to protect mothers, to pass legislation to assist mothers and families in need. This isn't the end of the pro-life movement. It's the next stage. And to my mind, it's an even more important stage.
Talk a little bit more about that it's a more important stage. And by the way, I share your tension this morning, which is the fact that this is leaked is a big deal. This is a big story. But reading the opinion and thinking, okay, if the final opinion is anything like this is kind of what we hoped for, right? I mean,
yeah, we've been working for it, but we've been praying for, yeah.
So, I mean, does the opinion, as you understand it, go as far basically as it could have gone in terms of dismantling Roe and Casey and all that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely dismantling Roe and Casey. It went as far as the Solicitor General of Mississippi asked them to do, which was to admit that Roe and Casey were wrongly decided and to return the question to the democratic process. I'm of the opinion that the court could go further. I'm with Robbie George and John Finnis and some other scholars who say that properly understood, the word person in the 14th Amendment includes all human beings, that these were not Peter Singer style, like higher consciousness persons, that the ratifiers of the 14th Amendment, the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment, the word person meant all of us, and that none of us could be denied equal protection of the law or due process of the law. But the court wasn't asked to reach that question, right? So that's why I think none of us were expecting that this court would go any further than this. And so they have done what Mississippi asked them to do, which was to admit Roe and Casey got it wrong. Again, presuming that this draft opinion, something like it, becomes the final opinion. But then the other part of your question was, why is this, this next stage of the pro-life movement a more important stage? Was that, for the first stage, pro-lifers had unanimity in that Roe had to go, right? And there was almost like a singular objective that, we can all agree that the next step is getting rid of Roe, getting rid of Casey. But now the next step, we're going to need to actually have deliberation amongst ourselves. We're going to have charitable disagreement amongst ourselves in terms of, what's the best legislative strategy. Some people are going to be proposing 15-week bills, other people 6-week bills, other people conception bills. And it's going to depend on the jurisdiction, right? What's possible in certain states isn't possible in other states. What's possible at the federal level isn't possible at state level, or what's possible at state levels isn't possible at federal level. And so we're going to actually have to, have some prudential decision making. And then we need to be addressing both the lethal violence in the womb, the abortionists, Planned Parenthood, but also the various social, cultural, and economic factors that leads someone to think they need an abortion. And that's going to be a response both for policymakers and for civil society, both for the law and for the church. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to take place. And that's why I say, to a certain extent, it's a more important phase of the pro-life movement. It's also going to highlight who's pro-life in name only, right? Because having worked now for a decade in DC, a lot of us know who the elected officials are who campaign on being pro-life. And then when they get to DC, they don't want to have to vote on it. They don't want to have to do anything about it. In a post-Roe America, we're really going to see who's willing to expand social capital, political capital, to protect unborn babies, to serve their mothers, to promote family formation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Let's talk also about the reality then that, despite all the references last night, as I was watching the different news programs to The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm so tired of seeing that I could, jump off a bridge. But this is also going to spark California, New York, Michigan, Maryland, other places. And we've already seen not only protections of the rights that Roe v. Wade had codified, but even an expansion. I mean, there's language there that opens up very troubling territory. Abortion up till birth, not even clear, at least in the language, about a baby that survives abortion. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I don't know who meant what, but it's not good. What does this look like in terms of on the ground when you have abortion states and life states? What does that look like? Is this a repeat in a sense of slave states and free states? I mean, this is obviously, and you got a book coming out. I want to mention this with Alexandra DeSanctis, who's going to be speaking for us at an event in Michigan in the fall about the book. We're very excited. The timing couldn't be better. About how basically
we wrote it this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's
we worked hard to get the book done in time.
In time for this leak, yeah. Just crazy. But how abortion has poisoned everything. There was a statement this morning. What's it called? The abortion corruption or the abortion exception?
Abortion distortion.
The abortion distortion. It just everything. Confuses everything. And so it's hard to make these historical comparisons, right? I mean, the free states and the slave states, good heavens. I mean, what a chapter in American history. It led to violence. It led to abuse. Are we in? Is that a bad comparison? How do we think about living in an America where there are not only states where abortion's allowed, but California's talking about flying women to California and paying for their abortion?
Yep. It's not a bad comparison at all, especially because the underlying moral principle is the exact same moral principle. Are we all made in the image and likeness of God? Do we all have intrinsic worth and dignity? Should all of our lives be equally protected under the law? Right? I mean, that's what was at stake with slavery. That's what's at stake with abortion. It's also, I think, a fair analogy in the sense that abortion tourism, as the term is going to be devastating, especially when you're crossing minors, taking minors across state lines. I think even more commonly now is going to be abortion pill. Mail order abortions now account, if I remember correctly, for 56% of all abortions, chemical abortions. You don't even need kind of a doctor's visit for these. That the Biden administration during COVID used COVID as an excuse to remove the doctor exam, which is also going to have implications for sex trafficking. It used to be that one of the ways in which women who were being sex trafficked could kind of get help was when if they were pregnant as a result of the sex trafficking and they had to go to actual doctor's office. But now with abortion pills, the traffickers will have an easier time trafficking women. There's so much more that could be said about the problem with chemical abortion. It's also just like physically unsafe for women, especially when it doesn't go well. Psychologically unsafe when you are actually administering the lethal pill to yourself, and then you see your unborn child exit from your body. But just as a political question, the crisis of the House divided. Can the country stand? I don't see a long-term solution, right? I mean, I do think the country can't be, half pro-abortion, half pro-life. This is also why I think Section 5 of the 14th Amendment is so important. Section 5 explicitly empowers Congress to enact legislation guaranteeing the rights that the first four sections articulate are actually protected. And so the idea here was that after the abolition of slavery, there would be formerly slave states that didn't actually respect the civil liberties and the rights of the newly freed citizens. And so because you couldn't trust the former Confederate states to actually do these things, Congress would have to ensure that no state denied equal protection of the law or the due process of law. I think something similar is going to have to happen at the federal level. And that means elections will matter. Federal elections, the next presidential administration will matter. These upcoming midterm elections will matter. And again, there'll be a lot of work for those of us who are pro-life.
I wonder if Justice Alito, because he did, as Erin Hawley mentioned in the last segment, that he spent a lot of time on the biological difference, or what we know from biology now, and how different that was when Roe was decided. If he's kind of teeing that up, he's saying, look, I can't go that far, but here's what we now know. And is he teeing up this kind of personhood of the preborn?
I mean, I don't want to speculate about what the justice himself thinks on this, apart from what he's written. But I do think, look, there's a role for all of us to be championing the biological facts. Very few people want to say it, or are willing publicly, credibly, intellectually, seriously to say it's just a clump of cells, that we don't know when the life of a human being begins. And this is why, intellectually honest supporters of abortion like Peter Singer say, of course it's a human being, but it's not a human person, right? So the first step is going to be, make the biological argument. Second step is make the philosophical argument, the moral argument that all human beings are human persons because we all have a personal nature. We all have a rational nature. We're all made in the image and likeness of God. That's both a philosophical and a theological truth about, the imago Dei, human nature, philosophical anthropology. And some people are willing to accept that, right? That some people are actually like, the human creature is different than all other life forms. And that then leads the third argument that they'll make, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but, right? And I saw some of this last night from Catholics on Twitter. It's really, I'm Catholic. It's really distressing when I see Catholics saying, oh yeah, I'm personally pro-life, but I don't want to legislate my morality on others. As if every piece of legislation doesn't embody a certain worldview, a certain morality. Every law we have is enshrining, whether it's about property rights, whether it's about adult homicide, whether it's about child homicide.
Roe legislated morality, and so did Casey, right? Yeah.
And so, they're going to be different stages of pro-choice arguments that we're going to have to respond to, whether they're the biology, whether they're philosophy, whether they're the political theory, whether they're the constitutional theory. And that's one of the things that, you mentioned the book that Zan and I have coming out in June. We go through all of those sets of arguments, but then building beyond that, abortion has not been good for women. It's not been good for people with disabilities. It's not been good for people on the periphery of life. It's been terrible for our politics. We have a whole chapter on how it's corrupted the courts. If we still had time to make revisions to the book, we could add, another couple of pages about how yesterday's leak has damaged the integrity of the courts. More or less everything abortion has touched, it has harmed. And we can't identify anything that abortion has made better.
And we need to know that because, you could, although I don't think it's a legitimate thing to say, is, 1970s, early 1970s, they're trying to advance healthcare and rights. And, they were wrong, dead wrong and deadly wrong. And we should have known it back then and we didn't. But now we do know, the cat's out of the bag. The experiment's been had. We've slid down the slope that we, greased and soaked up. I think your book is so important for that. We ended the last segment with Erin Hawley talking about, look, if this is the decision, then the court has done its job. But the court only did its job because pro-lifers have done their job. And the same thing, state legislatures need to do their job, but we need to do our job. And part of our job is pointing to all these things and saying, look, abortion is not part of a civil society. Abortion is not something that brings flourishing, doesn't bring life. It promises that, but in the words of I forget who said this. It was just a brilliant line. It promised women liberation and it brought them abandonment. That's basically what it's Frederica Matthews Green.
Yes.
And your book really walks through that. Talk. And I know it comes out end of June, right? Is when that release date is for the book.
Originally, it was when we were expecting the Dobbs decision to come out.
Well, hey, my bingo card did not have Supreme Court leak on it either. So,
no.
Just give us that framework of that book, the title, and everything again, just so people can be expecting it. Because I think it's I don't know anything else like it as you describe it, and we need it in our toolkit.
Sure. I mean, so the title of the book is "Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing." And the title, all of my books have very explicit titles. The first book I ever did was titled "What is Marriage? Man and Woman: A Defense." Like truth in advertising, you know what you're getting. For this one, tearing us apart, in two ways, right? It literally tears unborn babies apart. But then as a culture and as a political community, it's torn us apart, right? Abortion, the past 49 years under Roe v. Wade, did not heal the nation. In Casey, the court said, we're calling on the nation to unify and accept this decision. No, it just further tore us apart, right? So, but then also, subtitle, abortion harms everything it touches. It helps nothing that it touches. The way that we structure the book, the first chapter focuses on the unborn child. Here's the argument of how abortion harms the unborn child. And then we respond to all of the most common arguments you hear from pro-choice activists about why it's not really a child, why it doesn't really have a right to life, et cetera, et cetera. Second chapter is how it harms women. And we look at that both philosophically, how abortion is predicated on the idea that the male body is the norm and that female reproduction and the reality of what my colleague at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Erica Bacchiacchi, refers to as the asymmetry of reproduction, right? There's an asymmetry with how the male and the female contribute to the reproductive process. Our culture, our economy, our law takes my body as the norm and my wife's body as somehow a defective version of the human body, rather than taking both body types and both roles in the reproductive process seriously, and then crafting public policies, laws, educational programs, economic programs around that reality. But then also there are both physical and psychological harms of abortion to women. So the second chapter focuses on how abortion harms women. Third chapter is focused on how abortion harms the already marginalized populations. Here's where we looked at discriminatory forms of abortion, eugenic forms of abortion. And this goes back to the very founding of Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger. We look at how people with disabilities are discriminated against in the womb. We look at how women, baby girls, are discriminated against in the womb. And then when we point out the hypocrisy of the voices that are loudest in condemning discrimination outside of the womb turn a blind eye when discrimination takes place in the womb. And then we also point out some of the racial dynamics of abortion. More Black babies are aborted in New York City than are born. One of the most unsafe places to be a Black American is in the womb. And that's a reality, a sad reality that we need to address. Fourth chapter looks at how abortions undermine medicine. Right? It's harmed the practice of medicine. It's corrupted various professional medical associations where they're just lying about the science, lying about the medicine. But it's also like the practice of medicine. If you're no longer viewing the unborn child as a patient, but as an intruder, as a parasite, if you're not taking healthy female reproduction as a sign of health, but as something that you need to suppress, something that you need to combat, it's corrupted medical practice. That was 4. Chapter 5 looks at the legal system and the courts in particular. Chapter 6 looks at the political process. We used to have 2 pro-life parties. We used to have pro-life Democrats. It's a big political problem that pro-life Americans no longer have a meaningful political choice, right? And our polity would be healthier if neither political party was committed to injustice. And then the last chapter, chapter 7, looks at how it's harmed our popular culture, right? And whether that's big business, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's social media, we just document a variety of ways in which abortion has harmed our culture. And then the conclusion kind of, has just some, the concluding chapter is, thoughts on moving forward. And it's more of an outline in the sense of, we have to address all of these issues. This one book isn't providing all of the answers, but it's kind of like where we open with this next stage of the pro-life movement. We're going to need to be able to think out loud with each other, disagree with each other charitably about what the most kind of prudential, tactical next steps are, with the ultimate goal. Like, this has to be the ultimate goal. Every life is protected in law. It's welcomed in life. And every woman and every family experiencing an unplanned pregnancy or a challenging pregnancy is given the societal support and the political support that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, to take that comparison forward, at the very best, this decision, if it reflects this opinion, that draft that was leaked, dismantles this kind of fabricated legality of abortion. The goal is that abortion is in the dustbin of history like slavery. It is unthinkable. It is morally reprehensible. It is not an option for us. And that does require, as you have pointed out, that people on the ground continue to be able to make the arguments, continue to be able to love on others, especially women in vulnerable situations with pregnancies, and that we have the social fabric, the local charities, the care, and the public policies that we need. So it sounds, I mean, this is not a finish line. There's a lot of work ahead, and we'll be looking forward to that book, Ryan, and very excited for it, because the timing is great. We need a game plan going forward. What now? And next week in Orlando, Florida, to open up our Wilberforce weekend special event Thursday night with Erin Hawley, Stephanie Gray Connors, Kristen Hawkins of Students for Life, Jim Daly, and Tim Tebow. And we'll be starting this conversation with that group of people. And man, the timing again. Who knew we were gonna kind of get a glimpse into what's happening. Ryan, thanks so much. Appreciate your work. Where can folks follow you if they want to follow again as you continue to bring some analysis to this whole situation? Where can they find you?
Sure. The Ethics and Public Policy Center is my kind of institutional home. I'm the president there. It's eppc.org. And then on Twitter, that's where you can find kind of all of my Insta analysis. It's at Ryan T. And, RYANTAND. And can I just add one last thing? I mean, I want to ask, any of our listeners and viewers, just, pray for the justices. Because I also think one thing we haven't gotten to touch on is that, I think unfortunately this leak has elevated the risk that they face just personally for their physical security, for their families. God forbid someone tries to do something to one of the justices between now and when the opinion is finalized, to prevent it from being finalized with the right vote count. I've received messages from friends saying that, that's a legitimate concern. And so, we should pray that nothing more happens in a bad direction, that this is where this stops, and that there are no aftermaths to this that would be tragic as well.
It's such an important point, and thank you for bringing it up. The history of the pro-life movement started with, a desperation and led to violence from pro-lifers. It would be foolish of us to think that there is not that same sort of passion on the other side. In fact, that's part of what your book talks about. There is that passion. You just had to scroll through Twitter last night, and it was hysterics, absolute hysterics, blatantly false things like, they've just criminalized abortion. None of that's true. But what it really reflects is how deeply ingrained this ethical dilemma has been, and this moral evil. And evil corrupts. This is the point, right? Evil corrupts. And evil that's allowed to hide flourishes even more. And so we're unrooting an evil that has been deeply embedded, deeply flourishing for a long time. It's gonna be. We need to pray for God's grace and protection, including for you, because you're out there, you're out there, on Twitter as well. And and that's verbal jousting, but there is enough here to know, gosh, there's there's a risk. There's certainly a risk for these justices. So we need to be in prayer for them. So thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you, my friend. Good to see you as always.
Thank you. Yeah, great to see you.
Well, thanks for joining us for this very special episode of the Breakpoint Podcast with Erin Hawley of the Alliance Defending Freedom and Ryan Anderson of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Obviously, there's a lot more developments to come in this particular story, both in terms of the leak and in terms of what the final decision will be. But I hope you will plan on joining us in Orlando, Florida, next week, Thursday, May the 12th, as we talk about what it looks like to live in a post-Roe America. Obviously, the timing could not be better. We have a little bit more of an insight of what kind of legal and political situation we're walking into now in the days ahead. So go to wilberforceweekend.org. That's wilberforceweekend.org. You do not have to be at the entire weekend in order to join us for the special Thursday night event, and it is absolutely free. But you do have to sign up because we have limited space available. So go to wilberforceweekend.org. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.